Hello everyone, and welcome to our session today on Power BI Integration. Joining us today is Tom Doran from Innovia Consulting. And before I pass it over to Tom, I would like to remind you that this session is being recorded and it will be available for you to review and share on our website. It will be on our on-demand webinar library by the end of this week. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to type those into the questions box, and we will get those called out and answered at the end of the presentation. So now I'll pass it over to Tom to kick off our presentation.
Thanks, Angie. Good morning, everyone. As Angie said, I'm Tom Doran, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Innovia. I've been working with NAV and now Business Central for the past 20 years. Been with Innovia for the last 11, and really excited with the amount of investment that we're seeing from Microsoft into the Business Central product. For those of you that have been around a long time, I think we've sort of been on a bit of a roller coaster from pre-Microsoft through early days of Microsoft, and I know many of the NAV evangelists and fans are thrilled to see that NAV and now Business Central has really taken on the platform that we know and love. Today we're going to talk a bit about business intelligence and Power BI and what that can mean for your companies, and it can mean a lot. As we move through, let's see here. There we go. So, we hear a lot of discussion, depending on, the channels and the places that you're participating. You hear about cloud, and you hear about big data, and we hear about artificial intelligence, and really we need to begin to clarify in our own minds, what does that mean? But, a couple of common definitions relative to what does business intelligence actually mean in the marketplace is that procedural and technical infrastructure. But at the end of the day, this first definition I feel misses a little bit, right? Just storing and analyzing data doesn't get us where we want to be. And so, when we look at the intelligence piece of business intelligence, I liked this definition from CIO.com a little bit more, that talks about informing strategic and tactical business decisions. And really that's the idea behind the intelligence in business intelligence. In a conversation recently, I don't know how I arrived at this phrase, but I would say just in its simplest form, in my view of business intelligence, we want to turn all of this data into the knowledge to drive better decisions, right? We need to make sure that all of the inputs that we put into Business Central or a CRM system or any other line of business application that we might use, we need to give thought into how are we going to take all of this data and use it to make better decisions. And so we're going to take just a few minutes and talk about the process that we need to go through, because at Innovia, what we discovered with many of our customers and prospects is that people see pretty pictures. They see these dashboards and they see Power BI demos. They're, if you're on newer versions of NAV or Business Central, you're beginning to see Power BI show up in your list views and your role centers. And people get really excited about these pictures. But a picture in and of itself isn't really doing anything. It isn't many times hasn't been thought through at the front end. And so we need to really take some time and think about our data, because it all starts with the data. And so when we begin our process down the path of using business intelligence to better drive decision making, we need to think about all of our data sources and how are they going to help feed this decision-making process? Because we can't just sort of show up and throw up all of this raw data onto our end users, and certainly not on to our C-level executives. So as we start to walk through, we need to ask ourselves, a few questions. The first is really, what is it that I want to know? So when we talk to executives and we talk to operational managers, there are things that they want to know. And any good business owner or business leader, if you talk to them, and if most are honest, if you start to ask about key performance indicators or what do you need to know, they will start to talk about things that they think about. Very, very few companies are actually managing to true key performance indicators. But identifying those things, what do we need to know? And then sort of, what do we want to know, right? What do we want to pay attention to in our business that helps us drive decision making? And if you think back to these C-level executives, and certainly if you're in a privately held company, business owners, if you talk to them and you say, what are the things you look at? And usually there's a small handful, and they know, how many quotes did I generate? How many invoices? How many shipments? How many pounds of material? There are things that they inherently know because they've run this business from the beginning most times, and they just know the things that they've watched. And so while there aren't great dashboards or reporting, and people will often use those terms, I need a dashboard, I need a better report. Well, that's great, but we don't want people sifting through. When we drive back to that word intelligence, what we want are actionable items that are exception oriented. What do we need to pay attention to? And don't make our users sift through everything that's going great. If it's going the way it's supposed to be going, outstanding. We'll have a pizza party on Friday, but don't tell me about that because I'm already as busy as I can stand. And so then the last piece is what do we wish we knew? What are we thinking about in our industry, maybe in data sources that are outside of our systems? Because as Microsoft and the rest of the world becomes better interconnected, and we start to inform our business intelligence tools using some artificial intelligence, or subscribing to data services that are out in the world that tell us about, commodity prices or currency exchange, or, if we're US based, what do we, the Department of Commerce puts out a wealth of information, all of which can be subscribed to, that help us identify trends and begin to enlighten us on information that we may not have thought about before. And so once we've been through that early part of what do we wish we could know, then we start to take some more concrete actions, right? So in our planning process, and we can't just throw up, we should not, I suggest to you, just throw up dashboards and have people start to react to them. Done properly, we should do some planning. Innovia is happy to help with this. If you've not been down this path before, there's other companies. If you're not an Innovia customer, talk to your partner. If they don't do it, I'm sure they know someone who does. But we want to organize some formal planning sessions. And in this planning session, we should have someone who really understands data. Now, there's common sort of a hot topic right now. They call people data scientists. And, and that's not entirely wrong, although sometimes I do think that it intimidates some people. But we do want someone who has a grasp of where data lives and how it needs to be structured in order to ultimately produce it again in some form of analytical tool. If you don't have someone in your business, I would say to you that almost every technical college and local university that I'm aware of has some form of data analysis concentration or major right now. And these students are desperately looking for projects in the real world, and they can be great folks to help you just sort of listen early, because they're trying to just understand how your company functions, but then also give you some insights into how data needs to be structured. So then once we get that, we need to come together and find a key team. So the folks that usually this is, somewhere between 4 and maybe 10 people in larger organizations that are the operational leaders. So sometimes they call them a steering committee, but it's the folks that are the key people that we're going to want to be consumers of this data ultimately. And, if people, we don't want to have these conversations sort of one-on-one. We want it in a team. And the reason is that done properly, all of our data likely flows across multiple parts of our organization. And so by having everyone in the same room, they begin to appreciate how maybe the data that they're producing affects other people's ability to later do the analysis that they need to do in their part of the organization. And so we want to make sure that we invest the appropriate time to have these conversations. And this is where some organizations really get a little bit antsy, because they've seen some demos, they've listened to different conferences, they've maybe stumbled across research, or they've gone to the Power BI website or other business intelligent tool websites, and they're super excited. They want to get rolling. They're like, look, I've seen this stuff. It's out there. I think we can do it. And you can do it. But it's sort of like saying, hey, I drove by a house I really like. Let's get some lumber and just start building. We need to take the time to get the drawings. We need to invest the energy we need, because almost every time that Innovia has led one of these discussions, it becomes clear that we're missing 1 or 2 pieces of data that just don't exist in our system or in a system that we can readily tap into. And so if we take the time at the front end to really understand what we're hoping to get as an end result, then we can do a better design and not put our team and ultimately our end users and our line folks through a bunch of changes when we discover that we didn't get what we were hoping for, and now we've got to tweak our process a little bit. So, the other thing we want to do is we want to start to distinguish what are the main drivers. So when we're in this discussion, We will typically work with the C-level folks and the owners and the operational folks, and we will begin to really start to ferret out the real drivers in our business. And a lot of times this comes down, you know, my graphic here, there's lots of opinions. Everybody, if you walk through your company and you ask folks to a person, you know, what's the main thing that impacts our business, you are going to get a variety of answers. And so what we're trying to discern here is, you know, what are those drivers, and then how are we going to go about really beginning to measure this information. And so when we look at how these drivers are impacted by day-to-day activity, the larger your organization is, the more surprised sometimes senior folks are. And that's why it's important that we get our operational leaders in here, our line leaders, because they're the folks, as the drivers begin to get identified, they're the folks that start to go, hey, well, you know, wait a minute, Jason, you realize that, you know, Sally, the shift leader here, this is what actually goes on when they're producing our product. And there are aha moments that take place, either in terms of what's actually happening, how decisions are made, or how data either is or is not entered in order to get better insight and capture that information. And so we want to make sure that we understand all of this, because this is how we're going to keep score. We have to, once we understand the drivers, we've got to start to arrive at, you know, how do we know if we're winning? What constitutes a good number? And a good number shifts, right? So we're going to start in our process today, but over time, and it shouldn't usually change every year, but it will certainly change over time. And it is important that on some maybe quarterly or semi-annual basis, we evaluate what we consider to be a good number, because these are the things that we're going to use to start to bring our team along. So once we've defined, you know, how do we know how we're going to keep score, then we go back and we figure out who really influences these activities. And what Innovia has found in working with our customers is now it starts to be really important in how we bring our team members along to help us keep score. Who can actually influence, you know, how we're measuring how much sugar goes into our product, or how we're measuring how we're calculating freight. How do we manage our truck loading process so that our routes are run most efficiently? All the things that start to build cost into our equation or affect revenue that enable us to improve our performance. And those come down to the individual contributors on our team. And it's important to understand who can influence these levers that we've talked about. And so once we get that, we need to understand then, how are we going to go about measuring it, right? So how are we going to keep track of that? How are we going to ensure that we know the score of the game every day against what our plan says it's going to be? And then finally, once we're done there, who's going to be responsible for that number? So as we start to go and produce all of this information, who should see it once it's being measured? And another trap that I think we see, and typically it's in some of our smaller and mid-sized companies, but you know, there's sort of an old saw among management theorists that say, you know, if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. And that doesn't mean that we might not have a few people that see this number, but one person should own it. And that's the person that we're going to, when we meet in our weekly or monthly meetings to start to evaluate these numbers, we want to be able to turn to one person and say, okay, here's where we're at. You know, this number's outside of our range. What are you doing about it? Do you need help? And those are really the questions we want to ask, right? First, we should expect they're aware, right? Because we're now measuring it, we're putting it in front of their face in some method or form. And then what do we expect that they're doing about it? And if they need additional resources, either monetary or personnel or executive support, you know, they need to have a method for requesting that so that we can hold they and their teams responsible for improving on this number that we said was important to us. So, you know, now I'm gonna take a look. So that's a lot of talk, and I know that many times people want to see the actual products, and I'm happy to do this now. But I hope that I have stressed appropriately the importance of doing the planning at the front end, because the pretty pictures are awesome, but if we haven't done the proper planning, the pictures may in fact lead us down a path that is not the right path for us. So I'm going to click in here. So this is Power BI. If you haven't been out here, go to powerbi.com. You can log in. If you have Office 365, it's going to allow you to log in and you can get some trials. I'd encourage you to take a look. So when you go to get data, right? So I have already loaded a bunch of items in my Power BI workspace, but it starts by getting data. And there's a few places that you can do this. So there's samples. So if you're a Business Central user in particular, there's some pretty good samples out here. So if you go to the search under the data section and type in, you know, Business Central, you'll see it pops up. So if you're using Salesforce, if you're using other systems, I'm not going to mention competitors because I just don't like them that much. You can find other resources, but there's some good, you know, CRM, there's finance, there's jobs, there's items, purchasing. There's some things to give you a starter pack to help you begin to manage this. And so once I log in, and I've done this once, but I'll just walk through it quick. So if I want to connect, it's simply going to ask me, hey, what company am I attached to? So in my case, well, let this go a little too long. This will reload quick, so just give me a second because this is important. You got to spell this exactly right, okay? So whatever your company name is, just make sure commas, periods, capitals, these all matter, right? But you're going to connect to your database, you're going to log in, and then as long as you have security, the connection should be pretty simple at that point. At least it has been for me when I'm using the sample data here. And we'll pop through a couple of these in just a second. If you're subscribing to other services, right? So you can subscribe to services that will begin to allow you to do more sophisticated data pulls and bring those into your Power BI analysis. But so now I'm going to switch to some of my recent items that I've used several times. So, you know, CRM is a popular one, right? Most people can get their head around how are we tracking our opportunities, right? So they, you know, sales executives, one of the things that drives a CRM project more than almost anything else is either a new sales manager comes in and they used another system and they want to use the system they've always used, and mostly it's because they can see a pipeline. They can see where their opportunities are, and they understand how to hold their team accountable. Executives fall into this in any stripe. So you show most senior folks who don't have great CRM systems or don't have decent analysis tools, and you start to see these pictures and they start to get really, really excited. So, just giving ourselves an ability by region to have a look, see our revenue, both weighted and all up, how many opportunities are we looking at? So these are all standard reports. So you could begin, if you're using NAV relationship management, and if you're not, there's different reports you can use for CRM, but you begin to get the idea. And then as you click on these, everything filters dynamically. And so when you click away, then you get the other information. And so, there's jobs, there's sales and marketing, there's all kinds of solid information to help you run your business more effectively. But coming back to the first part of my point, if we haven't done the planning, then these dashboards are nothing more than pretty pictures, and they can actually send us down a rabbit hole, or they can get somebody excited about a number that frankly either isn't important or is not truly the root cause. And so if we have done a good job at the front end, we've identified our key performance indicators, we understand why they're important, and we're putting this information in front of our teams appropriately. So that's all important. Now, I talk about these dashboards, but it's equally important, and you can subscribe to services that'll do this. If I get outside of a range, maybe send me a text message. Certainly as we're bringing, and I am a self-confessed old guy, right? I've been doing this 20 years. I was doing something else for 10 or 15 years before that. And I was just talking with one of our newer hires the other day. We were having a discussion, and I said, I'm not quite certain how I got to be the 55-year-old old guy, but here I am. And so I need to make sure that I'm thinking about, how do people want to be communicated with? And many of our younger leaders, they live and die by text messages and other social communication tools. And so we want to make sure that we're communicating with them about these key performance indicators in a method that's appropriate for them to take timely action. So then, so we start to think about Business Central, and this is where Microsoft is really beginning to invest more money. So as we start to look at our dashboards, if I scroll down here, I've got Power BI reports. And so as I build my report library, I can begin to manage these reports. I can upload different reports and determine what people see on their screens. So, once we've done our planning and we've built our reports library, then we can subscribe to these reports and put them on our users' role centers so they see them front and center. Microsoft has done a couple of things, built into the product, and we're going to see more. So if I search, I know my Paris guest chair has a little bit more data. So, I can begin to see plans of, what I've sold, what I've purchased, what my anticipated numbers are. And now Microsoft is going to take this Power BI data, and they're actually going to begin to incorporate it to some of the artificial intelligence, or their Cortana business intelligence tools, and start to use this to help us identify trends that are not maybe readily apparent to most end users. The same idea for customers. And so, if we build a plan for customers, then we'll start to begin to see some trend data, you know, relative to what we expected them to do, what their actual sales are, and then the Cortana Business Intelligence will help us maybe see, again, trends that we might not have otherwise identified. You'll see more and more of this. You know, one of the demos that Microsoft does is payment trends. And so trying to help us identify customers that maybe seasonally or through some pattern have indicated to us that, you know, they might be a slow pay, or there could be, you know, business filings that are out in the community that indicate that these folks might have trouble paying. And so Microsoft is using all of this business intelligence and Power BI to begin to present to our users the tools that they need to make better decisions and take action in our businesses day to day. So all of that said, that is where we were going today. So I appreciate all of you being here. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, we do have a few that came through, Tom. Does Power BI support mobile devices?
It does, yes.
And what's the difference?
It does Business Central. So when you load these tools, actually, this might be too much, but I can do it in just a second. So if I go back to my role center here and, oh, I'm in the wrong. All right, so 2 seconds. Let me hit another database. So in your sandbox database, which you're eligible for when you install the product, you can actually move into design mode. And so when you're designing, it allows you to see what the solution will look like on a mobile device, whether that's a tablet or a phone. And so I'm going to switch to somebody that might look a little more familiar. So let's go to a sales and a relationship manager. And so, you know, as my role center has a few more graphics on it, right? So I've got a pipeline, I've got my opportunities. And so if I move into design mode here, then you'll see your different, I apologize, we're having a bit of a blizzard here. And so I'm at home and I've got kids and dogs. But I've got a desktop view here. But if I want to see the phone, then it will show you how it's going to render on the phone, and your Power BI will render as well. So you'll begin to be able to see anything that you're particularly looking for and how it's going to look on a phone. But Microsoft, you know, uses the term device aware, and so it's going to know what you've logged in on and attempt to render your screens appropriately. But when you're designing these screens, certainly in Business Central and in Power BI, it will give you a chance to look at that so you can see how they'll present.
Okay, thank you. And a few more. What's the difference between Power BI Pro and Power BI Premium?
Ooh, so you know what? I'm not the licensing guy. I could, Angie, if you get the name of the person that asked that, or if all the attendees, I'll tell you what, we'll send that answer to all the attendees because I don't know.
Okay. Does Power BI come with D365 Business Central SaaS?
So there is a small use. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is that there is a limited user that's a couple of bucks that needs to be activated so that some of these things behave the way you expect them to.
Okay. And does NAV 2018 on-prem work with Power BI?
So it does, and 2018, The setup is easier with 2018, but you have to get in to your web services and or OData and begin to expose the tables that you want to integrate with, so that you can begin to interface and interact with your data within Power BI. So it's a little more complicated, but it's absolutely possible, and it's way easier than it was in earlier versions.
Okay, I believe those are all the questions that we have for today. Please feel free to contact us if you have any additional questions that you want to discuss. All right, well, thank you, Tom, for presenting today, and to everyone on today's call, or if you're watching on demand, thank you for joining us. And we do have a few more webinars coming soon. On Wednesday, February 6th, we have Scott Borsodi from Innovia Consulting. He will be presenting on increasing your DSRs and CSRs productivity. And we have Per Mogensen from Merge Tool. Per will be presenting on setting up security in a few hours with Easy Security. And this webinar will be on Tuesday, February 12th. All right, well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Angie, one quick one. I would just put out a couple of plugs. So just remember, if you haven't seen it already, NAVUG Focus is in March in Houston. That's a great deep dive opportunity. There'll be a lot of Power BI information there, as well as Business Central. And then the Innovia Customer Conference is coming up in April. All the information for both of those events is on our website. But reach out to your Innovia customer engagement person or visit our website. We would encourage you to get registered today because hotels are going fast.
All right, well, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again on another Innovia webinar. Have a great day, everyone.